All right, this is immigration and citizenship attorney Parviz Malakouti. Thanks for showing up to our 29th space. Today we're talking about FBI background checks for quote unquote outbound Americans. And what I mean by outbound Americans is a wide meaning, broad meaning. I'm talking about Americans that are not just moving from the United States, but Americans who are pursuing citizenship and residency in other countries, even if they don't necessarily want to act on those citizenships right away to go live in somewhere else. So just as a reminder, this is our 29th space in our series of 50 mobility spaces this year. We're talking about the most important topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty, and of course, passports. Got to talk about the passports. And it's kind of unusual to dedicate an entire space to just one document, just one type of document. But the FBI background check, in my opinion, is special. It's a special document that deserves an entire space to talk about it. And that's because I call the FBI background check the most important document for Americans' freedom of movement that they're not aware of. Okay, so it's the most important document for Americans who want maximum freedom of movement that they're not aware of, that they don't know about they don't know of its importance. And the reason is because currently, if you're an American, either an American citizen, or if you're somebody who's been a resident in the United States for a significant period of time, and that can be 6 months, 3 months, or 1 year, depends on the other country that you're applying for a benefit in. But if you're in one of those two categories and you're applying for a citizenship or a residency in another country, most of the time that other country is going to ask for, there's different terms, but typically it's something along the lines of a police certificate, okay, or a criminal record certificate, something like that. And in the vast majority of times, the document that those other countries are asking for is the FBI background check, aka the FBI identity history summary. So in this space, we're talking about the FBI identity history summary. There are actually other types of FBI background checks that are available for different purposes, but that's not what other countries typically ask for. They typically ask for the FBI identity history summary. So therefore, if you're an American and you're applying for a residency or citizenship elsewhere, and the majority of the time they request this document, this is a key document. Okay, it can be said this is a key document for Americans, right? And there's a lot of issues. There's different type of issues that can come up related to an FBI background check. The first one is a criminal record, right? If somebody has a criminal record, people use these terms like he's a criminal, they're a criminal. Over 70 million Americans estimated have some sort of criminal record, either a misdemeanor conviction or a felony conviction. So this is not like a hardcore criminal thing, okay, where you only have to deal with these issues if you've been, convicted of a hard crime and done hard, time in prison. 77 million people have some sort of criminal record, okay, misdemeanor conviction or felony conviction. And that's not even speaking of people who have had some sort of detention or an arrest that did not lead to a charge, or an arrest and a charge that did not lead to a conviction. So this is an issue that a lot more people are dealing with than people think, okay? And if you have a criminal conviction from 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that's going to show up on your FBI background check. These criminal records do not come off just by the passage of time, okay? That's a huge misconception, okay, that I see. I just had a consultation last week from a gentleman 30 years ago, okay, criminal conviction, okay? He had a hazy idea about whether this would show up on the FBI background check, whether it would be something that appears. This is an FBI background check, not private background checks. Private background checks have different rules about how long a conviction can stay on the record, or whether a conviction that has been expunged or has some sort of post-conviction relief can stay on the record. For FBI background check, the default is the record stays on no matter how much time has passed, right? So these are issues, okay? Currently, the issue is Americans applying for residency and citizenship required to give this background check. But I also think that there's another bigger issue looming on the horizon, even for Americans who don't want to apply for residency and citizenship in a foreign country. And I think that issue is this migration, this shift that we're seeing from visa free going to what I call visa light. What I call Visa Lite is requiring an electronic travel authorization. Okay, we're seeing this trend in countries around the world. Okay, where Americans have visa-free access. It's no longer the case where you just have your American passport, you book the flight, and you show up in the passport. Surprise, I'm here, and you present the passport to the border officer. Increasingly, countries are asking for Americans to apply for electronic travel authorization ahead of time and to answer questions. And some of those questions that they're being asked to answer has to do with whether they have a background, excuse me, a criminal conviction on their background. ETIAS, the proposed electronic travel authorization for access to the European Union, was already supposed to be implemented by now for Americans as well as other citizens of other countries that have visa-free access to the EU. And the implementation of ETIAS has been pushed back. Right now, it's scheduled, I think, to be implemented in the end of 2026. We're not sure when it's going to be implemented, but eventually it's going to be implemented. And here's what's going to happen, okay, in my opinion. Okay, so granted, some of this is speculation, what I would consider informed speculation. This is not fact yet. But what's going to happen is that Americans are going to apply for their electronic travel authorization, okay? They're going to be asked if they have criminal convictions, okay? The ones who do and are smart are going to say yes, okay? And it might not happen right away, but eventually, those electronic travel authorizations are going to start to be denied for some Americans that have a criminal record. And what that means is that those Americans are going to have to apply for a Schengen visa or another type of residency permit in order to access those European Union countries, okay, for touristic purposes. And once they're in that category of having to apply for residency permits, especially if they were denied an electronic travel authorization for having had a criminal record, those Americans are going to be asked to submit their FBI background check. This is my prediction, okay? This is my opinion, and if anybody has a different sees it a different way, I would love to hear your perspective. But this is my opinion of what's coming down the pike, okay? Maybe not necessarily next year, maybe not necessarily 2026, but I think I think the beginnings of this starting to happen is going to be maybe 3 to 5 years down the line. And then in earnest, I think this is really going to start happening kind of in larger numbers, maybe in about 5 years, 5 to 6 years down the line. So why am I talking about it now? Because it has to do with the FBI background check. And it kind of increases the importance of this document for Americans that are outbound. Okay. So that's why the FBI background check is so important for Americans that are outbound. I might actually go so far as to putting it overall in overall importance, maybe the second most important document after perhaps a birth certificate, okay, for Americans that are applying for mobility assets abroad. U.S., birth certificate, birth certificate for the American, if they're born in the U.S. or if they're born elsewhere, tends to almost universally be requested, whether it be for a naturalization process or for a verification of citizenship process, right? Verification is not naturalization. What I'm referring to is an application to get proof that you're already a citizen of a foreign country. So in that latter case, you're making the case that you were already born a citizen by operation of law, and the application is not to become a citizen. The application that you're making is to get proof of the citizenship. The bottom line is you're almost always asked for your birth certificate, okay? So maybe I would say the birth certificate is kind of, generally speaking, for Americans outbound, the most important document. Second most important, okay, and definitely the most hidden, in my opinion, might be the FBI background check because of that centrality for what it's requested, for it being requested. So what I want to go over here basically is common issues that people have, Americans, applying for second citizenship or residency with their background checks, some tactics, some strategies, okay, and generally speaking, what can be done to resolve or to fix big issues, okay, that people have. I kind of want to tailor this space to American citizens, what I call American dual citizens or Americans that are outbound. So obviously, it's not just American citizens that deal with FBI background checks. Even foreigners who come to the United States and have a period of residency could be asked to provide their FBI background check. We'll touch on that a little bit too, but really, I want to shape this space for the audience member who's an American, either a single citizen or a multiple citizen, and is interested in increased freedom of movement, and wants to basically have their FBI background check issues squared away, okay, for the rest of their life, okay, whether they have an imminent application pending or if they're just anticipating applying for something down the line, right? So we want to talk about basically what they can do to make sure that, first of all, they suss out any problems currently that their FBI background check has, okay? And then secondly, understand the fastest way to get an FBI background check, both from within the United States as well as from outside the United States, and the fastest way to get that background check apostilled, okay? Because not every background check that's requested from an applicant is asked to be apostilled, but a bulk of them are, a majority of them are, okay? So over 130 countries are party to the Hague Convention on Apostilles. And so those countries typically, not always, but typically require that higher level of authentication, that apostille of an FBI background check for Americans that are applying abroad, right? So that's it as far as my introduction's concerned, about kind of the conversation I want to have today. We got Patrick here, we got Inverted Fragility, we got David, we got Chris Lord. Just as a reminder, and our regulars here know the rules, we pretty much have one rule, which is everybody's welcome and anybody can speak. Feel free, if you want to speak, just send me a request. I will approve it right away, and we'd be happy to hear your question, your comment, or your pushback, or your disagreement. Okay, everybody's free to disagree here, including with me, if you think that you see things a different way. Okay, so I just want to take a few more minutes and basically just talk about different categories of common mistakes that I see for the FBI background check. And then I'm going to throw out a question to Patrick McFawn, who's also a practitioner here. He's a consultant for Citizenship by Descent. And so I know in his practice, he also deals with serving a lot of clients that have to get FBI background checks. So I'm sure Patrick's going to have some input as well. So mistakes. Okay, first thing that I want to basically talk about is this. FBI background checks have mistakes, and they have mistakes often. Okay, this is not like a really super duper uncommon thing. If you have any type of criminal record, okay, and I'm going to define criminal record broadly as any arrest, charge, or conviction. Okay, so if you have any one of those three, I'm going to define that as broadly as having some sort of criminal record. If you have an arrest, a charge, or a conviction for something, there's a very good chance that your FBI background check has a mistake in it. Okay, so understand that first and foremost. So if you're sitting listening to this and you know that you had some sort of brush with the law, understand there's a very good chance that your FBI background check has an issue with it. Okay, there's different types of issues. Okay, different types of issues that are common. Okay, first type of issue that I see that's really common is a person was arrested and charged. In real life, they were also convicted. Okay, so they took some sort of plea. Let's call it DUI. DUI is a very common misdemeanor. Okay, they're arrested and charged with DUI. They pled guilty. They had some sort of sentence, typically probation. Okay, this is what happened in real life. They go to get their FBI background check. Let's say it's 10 years later, okay, because they didn't even know that there's such a thing, an FBI background check, until 10 years later when they're applying for citizenship in a foreign country, okay? They get the FBI background check and it shows the arrest and the charge, and that's it. Okay, that's the end of what shows there. Nothing else shows, okay? That's a problem. That's a mistake. Why is it a problem? Okay, because for a lay person who's reading that FBI background check, and most of the adjudicators in foreign countries are not lawyers, they don't know how to read an FBI background check. For those people, for the average person who looks at this, it appears that the case is still open. The arrest shows, the charge shows, and then there's nothing after that. It doesn't show what happened. Were they convicted? Were they dismissed? Did the case go to trial? Okay, and they were acquitted. It appears that the issue is still open. That's a problem. That's a mistake. And that's usually going to stop the person in their tracks as far as getting the benefit that they want. Okay. That has to be resolved by making a challenge to the FBI CGIS, okay, to basically make the claim that the dispo is incomplete and it needs to be completed. That's one category of mistake I see. Second category of mistake that I see is a person was arrested, charged, convicted, okay, in real life. All three of those things show in the FBI background check. But then later on, the person went and got some sort of post-conviction relief. Post-conviction relief means some sort of expungement, expunction, vacatur, record sealing. Okay, something that a person gets a relief after the conviction, okay, to ameliorate the effects of the conviction, whatever it is that they got. There's different terms for different states. Even the word expungement doesn't mean the same thing in different states. Okay, so this is a highly case-specific issue, for individual people. But the point is, they get some sort of post-conviction relief, okay, and the FBI background check does not show that. All it shows is just the arrest, the charge, and the conviction. Doesn't show that the case was expunged later or vacated or sealed, etc. That's a second category of mistake. That can also be resolved by making a challenge, okay? And there's different things that go into the challenge. Maybe we'll get into that if we have time in this space. Otherwise, I'll have to, defer people to the articles and videos that I have on my YouTube channel, okay? Third type of common mistake. Well, third one is less common, okay, but I saw this one for the first time about a year ago, and since then I've seen it a few times since then. Okay, and that's a person is arrested, they're charged, they're convicted. Okay, so it starts out the same way as the first two categories. Okay, and their FBI background check has a mistaken caption, okay, for the crime that they were convicted under. Okay, so typically in the FBI background check, it'll show basically a citation to a legal code. So, for example, in California, it'll be penal code, okay, or vehicle code, or some other code, health and safety code. Okay, so you'll see a reference to a statute. And then typically you'll see a few words to describe, okay, what the person was convicted of. Okay, so, DUI, okay, or, assault or battery, okay, assault with a deadly weapon. That's a caption. It's just a few quick words to describe generally what a person was convicted of. Okay, well, the mistake, this third type of mistake that people deal with, okay, that they see, is a person is convicted, okay, the statute reference on the FBI background check is correct, but there's a totally incorrect caption, okay, that's put there, okay? A caption for a totally different crime, a crime that not only were they never convicted of, sometimes even a crime they were never even charged with, literally just a complete mistake, okay? That can be a problem. The first time I saw this issue, and I just put up a video on YouTube, just a short, okay, explaining the situation. First time I saw this issue was a guy who had been convicted of a crime previously 30 years ago. Okay, he wanted to apply for a residency permit in a European Union country. Okay, his attorney there said, "We need your FBI background check." He got the FBI background check. FBI background check showed the statute that he was convicted under. Okay, the citation to the statute, but the caption read, I don't even want to say it, but the caption described a sexual crime against a minor. Okay. This guy had a consult with me. I talked to him. I said, were you ever convicted? Did this have anything to do with a minor? No, had nothing to do with a minor. Okay, whatsoever. Not the conviction. It wasn't even a crime involving, it wasn't even a sex crime. Okay. I requested his documents from the court. Okay, confirmed that was the case. Complete mistaken caption in a really, really bad way, in a really offensive way. That guy was super upset for two reasons. One, he was worried about what it would mean for his eligibility. Secondly, he was disturbed that there was something on his record that reflected on him out there that he did something to harm a minor. He was justifiably upset. We end up getting that resolved. Okay, we made a challenge. We identified where was, which agency, which criminal justice agency generated the faulty information and contributed to the FBI CJS. We fixed that. That's the first time I had seen that type of issue, far out from me. Since then, I've seen it a couple more times, okay? But that's one category, okay? Fourth category, and we're coming to the end here. I'm going to get to 5 general categories, and then we're going to open this up to discussion. But fourth category is an FBI background check that entirely shows the wrong charge, okay? So completely wrong statute that's cited, okay? I've seen it. It happens. It's out there, okay? And then the fifth type of mistake, okay, is wrong biographical information, okay? So first time I saw this issue was for a client that I had done some immigration work for, okay? And we got his FBI background check. He didn't need the FBI background check for the immigration work that I had done for him, okay? But we got it anyway because I did some other post-conviction relief for him. And his FBI background check showed that he was a citizen of Singapore. The guy was born in the then Soviet Union, and he was a Russian citizen. He was not a Singaporean citizen, never been a Singaporean citizen, never even been to Singapore, okay? Faulty biographical information, okay? And that's something that we had to resolve with great difficulty. That resolving that case was even more difficult than other cases I've had, in which we've had to challenge FBI background checks for faulty criminal related information, right? So these are problems, okay? And I cannot hammer home enough. I'm going to sound like a broken record on this point. lots of FBI background checks have problems. This is not rare. It's extremely common, okay, especially for those first two categories. If you had some sort of arrest, charge, and conviction, and then you got a post conviction relief, I'm not confident saying just that a majority of the FBI background checks have problem, but it might be a majority. At least I would feel comfortable saying it's at least 30 to 40% of those FBI background checks that have those problems. Okay. This is an issue. Okay. If you are an American outbound, okay. If you're an American outbound and you have an imminent application pending and you're relying on having that benefit soon, whether to retire to or because you have other plans, plan to renounce U.S. citizenship or move abroad or whatever, then that's an imminent issue for you to be able to fix these the FBI background check problems. Sometimes that can take months. If you're an American outbound and you don't have an imminent application, okay, then these problems are latent liabilities. These are latent problems that are lurking under the surface that are going to inevitably rear their ugly head whenever you do come, to actually apply for a benefit abroad. So that's my introduction. I've been going for 21 minutes now. I want to open it up. I want to get some lively discussion going here. I want to kick out my first question to Mr. Patrick McFawn, okay, who also deals with a lot of FBI background checks. Okay, general question. I like to ask Patrick general questions to start off with to give him the opportunity to take it in the direction that he wants to take it in. Patrick, my question for you is, okay, being in the position that you're in, seeing a lot of FBI background checks as well, what do you think Americans should do? Okay, so freedom seeking Americans to make sure that their FBI background check doesn't trip them up for a current, so let's say an immediately pending application process or a future process. What should they do proactively now?
Fantastic question. I'm going to get a little bit philosophical on this, and I'm going to say put yourself in the shoes of a administrative worker in a consulate or a foreign country who's processing visa applications daily, is probably underpaid, also probably protected in their job, and sees all kinds of people all under the sun. You want to make their job as easy as possible. And when it comes to the FBI background check, you want that thing to be, they look at it for 5 seconds, have no worries, and move on to the next thing. The FBI background check is a huge deal if you have something on it, and it's no big deal if you don't. And that is an unfortunate, fork in the road for a lot of freedom-minded individuals. Um, but putting yourself in their shoes, you have to think their biggest worry is to control risk for people who are looking to have, you know, what used to be like a residency application, but in the future could be a tourist application through a tourist visa through ETIAS. Their biggest risks historically are whether or not you're a criminal or whether or not you have a health concern, which is a whole nother animal. But on the whether or not you have a criminal conviction, because when it comes to crime, supposedly past performance indicates future intent. I don't actually believe that, but in the minds of a bureaucrat, that might be true. And so, um, if they see anything that comes up, it's going to be a red flag and it's going to be a hurdle. And so, even if you're thinking to yourself, maybe I don't, maybe I'm not a freedom-minded person, maybe I'm content in my current situation, it still is a liability. It is a liability because anytime you need it or want to use it, it's gonna throw a red flag. And with everything in this world, it takes time to correct. It takes time to get it issued and apostilled. So getting it corrected is an endeavor that if anyone has something on the FBI background check, they should have started it yesterday. And so, I think on a go forward basis, I guess I'll offer one more perspective, and that is when you're operating in a foreign country, a bureaucrat at a consulate in a foreign country, and you are applying to become a guest there, that person has no ability to look at your criminal background because you haven't been in the country. And if you have been, it's been for a very limited amount of time, typically as a tourist, right? Like let's think of it for like say Mexico. You're applying for a Mexican residency, um, and they don't have access to information in the United States. They don't know, and so them as a sovereign country cannot access information that is, held within the United States, that's separate sovereign government. And so that FBI background check is their ability to confirm that you are who you say you are and that you don't have any criminal convictions, or if you did, they were not serious and they don't impact your ability to have this residency application processed correctly. And so I think, it's really kind of this foundational keystone or capstone, as they call it. Um, it's not even a capstone; it's foundational for your applications if you're outbound. And so it's definitely something uh, to be mindful of. And lastly, as you know, it's interesting because citizenship by descent is considered a birth, like, it is considered your right by birth. Um, and so some countries don't require it, but more and more countries do require it because the last thing they want is to unknowingly let someone who has a criminal record become a citizen of their country. Just as you need, just as you need to have a criminal background check for citizenship by investments, you're starting to see it more and more with citizenship by descent, or if they change citizenship by descent to something like the Hungarian simplified naturalization process, that requires an FBI background check. So, it's all about managing the risk from the other country's perspective, and that responsibility is on you to make sure that it's presented in the best light possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know in the United States that the FBI background check, the information that's shown on the FBI background check is not primary source information. The FBI background check is issued by the FBI CGIS, which is a repository. It aggregates and puts out information that's contributed by criminal justice agencies throughout the United States, over 18,000 criminal justice agencies throughout the United States. So, probation offices, police departments, courts, any number of law enforcement agencies, they contribute information to the FBI CGS. So we know that it's not the info that shows up on the FBI background check is not primary source. But in my experience, I can tell you the FBI CGIS is typically treated as kind of the controlling document, okay, by, I'm going to speak broadly here, okay, by adjudicators in foreign countries. This is the document that they ask for, they request, and they have faith in, okay, that's going to basically show them, what's going on with the person's, criminal record, okay. So it's important, so if you're, if they're deciding, your application and they think this document is important, even if they think it's more important than it should be, well, then by default, the FBI background check is important for you, of course, as the applicant, right? If you ever see an FBI background check, well, hopefully people here don't have, criminal records, but statistically, some people listening to this are going to. Like I said, 77 million estimated have misdemeanor or felony conviction in the United States. If you see what it shows on the FBI background check, a lot of it is acronym heavy and legalese. It's difficult to read, okay, especially if you don't deal with this type of work, okay, from the United States, especially if you're not some sort of criminal justice professional in the United States or a lawyer. Okay, so to Patrick's point, you want to have things presented to a foreign adjudicator that are as clear as possible. Okay, that provide as little friction as possible. Okay, so if you provide an FBI background check that shows that you are arrested and charged and convicted for DUI. I'm going to pick on DUI as examples because it's a super common misdemeanor. If you have an FBI background check that shows you arrested, charged, and convicted for DUI, and that's it, nothing else shows after that, okay? But really, in fact, you went and got that DUI expunged later, okay? Well, you can put forth that order of dismissal, okay, that expungement, and you probably should as part of your application, okay? But that's a mismatch now, okay? You have a document from a court that shows that this item was expunged, but that foreign bureaucrat, that foreign adjudicator may be under orders, either formal or informal, to base their decision off of the FBI background check. And if the FBI background check doesn't show the expungement, okay, or the dismissal, right? at very least, you may be creating friction for yourself. Maybe that has to go, maybe that your application goes on the bottom of their pile, okay, because they know they're going to have to talk to their supervisor and all this other type of stuff. Okay, let me put that on the bottom of the pile. Let me deal with these other applications now, and maybe I'll return to that pile a week from now, a month from now, 2 months from now. That's at very least. At worst, it could lose you the benefit. Okay, it could get you a denial. Okay, and then maybe you have to be forced to go back and apply again after you've updated that FBI background check. So those are just FBI background check issues for people who have had some sort of arrest, charge, and conviction. Okay, but as I mentioned before, some of the other types of mistakes that can be on an FBI background check don't have to do with the conviction. Okay, biographical information. Okay, being one of them. Right. So these are common issues. The other issue that I see with the FBI background check is just a lot of people get paralyzed, about how to request, what they need to request, what they need to do, what's official, what's not, whether it needs to be apostilled, whether it needs to be notarized. Okay. And part of that confusion is actually due to US Department of State. They have terrible language on their website that suggests, if not outright states, that the FBI background check has to be notarized before it's apostilled. You can't notarize an FBI background check. There's nothing to notarize. So it's just, there's no notarization. You get the official FBI background check, you send it for an apostille to the US Office of Authentications. But I'm just going to take a moment right now, and maybe I'll clip this later and post this up. Okay. This is what you need to do if you're an American outbound that's requested to get your FBI background check, whether you're applying for CBI, CBD, if it's a naturalization. CBD, citizenship by descent, can be by verification, birthright, as Patrick said, but it can also be naturalization. There are some CBDs that are straight naturalization. Hungary is one of them. Slovakia is one of them. There's other ones. So if you're naturalizing in that country, through descent, there's a good chance you're going to be requested to provide the FBI background check. Here's what you need to do. Okay, you have to request the FBI identity history summary. Okay. There's three ways to submit the application for the FBI background check, okay? And I'm using FBI background check and identity history summary interchangeably. There's three ways to make the application, and there's two ways to make the application, and there's three ways to give your fingerprints, okay? You have to pair one of those two ways of making the application with one of the three ways of rendering your fingerprints, okay? The two ways of making the application is, one, an online application through the FBI background check website, or two, a paper application, okay, on the form I-783. The three ways of giving your fingerprints are, one, through a qualifying USPS office if you're within the United States and you have one that's near you. Number two, okay, by taking your fingerprints or having your fingerprints taken on paper on a card, okay, FD 1164, and submitting them on paper, okay. And third, through an FBI-approved channeler. Okay, so these are basically private companies that are licensed by the FBI to take fingerprints. You have to pair one method from the first category, so one way of applying, with one method from the second category, okay, which is three ways of giving your fingerprints, okay? If you're within the United States, the fastest way, in my opinion, to do it is to pair an online application with getting your fingerprints at the USPS office, okay? If you do that, you're going to walk out of the USPS office, okay, you're going to get an email either that day, or it could take a few days if you have a criminal record. You're going to get an email with a link. You click the link. You're prompted to download a PDF copy of your FBI background check. That is an official copy of your FBI background check that you can send off for apostille. Yes, you're printing it. Your little HP or your Epson or whatever is printing that document, but it is actually an official document. Okay, printed copy of the PDF that's sent to you when you electronically from the FBI. Okay, you can send that off for apostille to the U.S. Office of Authentications. No, you don't get it notarized. You don't go past the notary. You don't do anything. You print that document, that FBI background check from the PDF you were emailed. Okay, you put it with an apostille request form, a return address envelope, and payment, which is $20 at present. But whenever you're listening to this, it may be something else. And then you send it off for apostille. Okay, that's it. Okay, that's the fastest way of doing the FBI background check, getting it from within the United States. I'll take a pause here, and then we'll go over the fastest way to apply from outside of the United States. But those simple points, tons of confusion on those simple points. I have a YouTube video. I think it's got like 38,000 views about how to request an FBI background check. Comments are absolutely filled with people asking over and over again about these same points that I just went over. Okay, so this is the fastest way to get it. I think, and we'll talk about this in a moment, if you're an American that is freedom minded, you should employ what I'll call the Giorno method. Giorno used to participate on some of the spaces. I think he's maybe on timeout now from X, but he has a brilliant way of, I think, dealing with with making sure that he's prepared for the FBI background check. He has, I think he said 5 or 10 paper sheets, FD 1164s with his fingerprints on them, okay, that he made ahead of time, okay. And I think he said he has those in the United States ready to be sent off for a request in the case that he's wants to apply for some sort of mobility benefit abroad. I think that's a brilliant method. I think that's a great way to prep yourself. We'll go over that in a moment, but I think Patrick wants to chime in here. Patrick, go ahead.
Oh, I got a really technical question for you. You said the 1164. Can you talk about is there any relevant difference between the 1164 and the FD 258?
Yeah, there is. So the FD 1164 is made specifically for the FBI identity history summary. So the FD 1164 is what you give your fingerprints on specifically for the FBI identity history summary, what we've been talking about. The FD 258 is a general purpose fingerprint card. It can be used for the FBI identity history summary request. I've used it plenty of times, although I've shifted off of using that or suggesting people use that because the FD 258, I forget which fields exactly, but it has 1 or 2 fields that are not on the FD 1164. And while I've not seen this myself, I've read online some people saying that they mistakenly filled out the FD 258 and their background check request was rejected. So I've used the FD 258 and I've had clients use the FD 258 for rendering fingerprints for other types of background checks, for example, Cal DOJ, record review, and a few others. But bottom line is FD 1164 is special purpose for the FBI background check, and FD 258 is more general purpose.
Perfect. That answers my question because as esoteric as it might be, I've done this similar process for clients and for myself in foreign countries who have their own fingerprinting processes for criminal record releases. And a lot of them accept the FD 258. And in my mind, that is an American form, and that designation is an American designation, but it is that's the one form that can be used a little bit more universally than the 1164. So that's why I asked.
No, it's a good question. And while we're at it, might as well reiterate. Um, in practice, you don't have to go to a professional to get your fingerprints rolled on the card. Okay. I say in practice because I have rolled my own fingerprints. I don't know how many times, maybe 15, 20 times at this point. Okay. Just myself alone to request background checks, FBI background checks for various experiments and tests. And I've never had my fingerprint card rejected because I signed the box for the person who rolled the fingerprints. So in practice, I've never seen that come up as an issue. Not only have I never had it happen with me, I've never had a client who have instructed roll their own fingerprints and then basically have it be rejected because they claim that the fingerprints weren't rolled by a professional. Okay, so for now, in practice, that's a non-issue. What is an issue is people giving bad fingerprints. Okay, people are sloppy with the fingerprints. Number one mistake I see, and I have had people come to me with consults who tried to make their own FBI background check request, rolling their own fingerprints, and they were rejected. Number one reason I've seen them be rejected for, okay, is that they were super sloppy with the positioning of their fingerprints. Okay, so half the print outside of the box, half the print inside the box. You got to be careful. You got to be neat. Okay, imagine you're back in kindergarten again. You're coloring, okay, and the assignment is to color inside the lines. Okay, well, you got to give your fingerprints. You got to roll your fingerprints inside the boxes there. That's the number one, reason I've seen them be rejected for. I've also seen some other older applicants who have had their fingerprints rejected. They rolled them themselves because either something like the FBI CGS wasn't able to pick them up, or no. So I forget exactly what the rejection language was, but the bottom line is the quality of the fingerprints wasn't good enough. So those are serious issues that can happen sometimes. And to avoid those, I would say if you live by a professional, okay, who rolls fingerprints, okay, or a FBI approved channeler. Get your fingerprints roll, hire them to roll your fingerprints. And if you're gonna get your FBI background, if you're gonna get your fingerprints rolled to get your FBI background check once, you might as well get 3, 4, 5 copies of the fingerprint card, and just hold on to them. The Giorno method. Hold on to them, save yourself the trouble of having to get those again in the future when you're applying for a mobility benefit. Patrick, have you had clients that had their FBI background checks or requests rejected or for any reason?
I have actually never had a FBI background check rejected. Um, I That being said, I've never had someone submit it with the inked fingerprints before because all of my clients are American, and it's worth it for them to just go to a designated digital place to digitally scan their fingerprints. Um, which, for what it's worth, is, I think, if you're based in the United States, is a billion times easier. It's not a mess. You don't have to make it. Generally, you don't have to make an appointment. It's usually at like kind of like hub postal service locations. Um, and so you go in, they usually have a shorter hour window for it, like 11 to 3 or something like that. And then I think I mean, it does cost a little more. I think it's $50 still. It might have gone up. Everything keeps going up. So I don't remember the exact price. I think it's $50. Um, on top of the FBI, when you initiate the application for your FBI background check, you pay some money to the FBI, and then the digital fingerprinting is, I think, $50, and that's done at USPS. So I almost exclusively recommend that. Um, I myself have done the inked process through having it, done at a local police station or doing it myself, but it's not something but if I'm recommending it to someone, it's someone who's done it before, because I just think, a lot of people don't even know about the FBI background check. And so as soon as they realize they have to get this done, you don't want to add a new task on top of what is kind of already kind of a complicated, black box process for the average person. And so I think that the digital method is significantly preferred.
Yeah, absolutely. Applying for the FBI background check online paired with getting the fingerprints at the USPS location, hands down, the best, fastest way of getting the background check if you're within the United States. Problem is, of course, some applicants are not within the United States, right? So they don't have access to a USPS location. If that's the case, and I promised I would go over that scenario, so let's go over right now. In that scenario, the fastest way of getting the FBI background check is still to make an online application. You still start off with the FBI website. You pay $18. That's the first fee that Patrick was referring to. Okay, you get a confirmation page, and then you got to give your fingerprints. Okay, so for that, the vast majority of people are going to be forced to take their fingerprints, either do it themselves or to go to a professional who will roll their fingerprints with ink on one of those two fingerprint cards, either the FD 1164 or the FD 258. I recommend the FD 1164. Okay. If you live if you're in a country, if you're in a foreign country, Argentina, Mexico, Spain, whatever, and there's a professional there that does this, go to the professional if they're close to you, pay whatever fee, get it done. If you're not close to a professional who does it, okay, you can do this yourself. Okay, not the best scenario, okay, not ideal, but if you have to, you have to. Okay, I'll put in the comment section below my article on my which has my suggestions. Okay, for rolling your own fingerprints, down to actually a link to the Amazon. It's not an affiliate link. Okay, I should make an affiliate link, but it's not an affiliate link. Down to the link for the ink pad on Amazon that I've used and I recommend people get. It's a $5 ink pad. Okay, you can also buy fingerprint cards from Amazon. Okay, but you don't need to necessarily do that. You can actually just download the PDF from online, print the PDF, and as long as you're careful with rendering the fingerprints, you can use that copy of the PDF of the fingerprint card, right? So if you're abroad, You still apply online for the FBI background check, get the confirmation, print it, okay? Take your own fingerprints using the instructions I just mentioned, as well as in my article, and then send off the request, okay, to the FBI. That's the fact. It's going to take a lot longer than if you're within the United States, okay, but that's the fastest way to do it, okay? Now, let's say you're an American citizen or a legal permanent resident. You're outside of the United States, okay? And you're in a time crunch. Let's say a program is ending, okay, and you can't risk waiting for a month. By the way, if you apply for if you apply for the FBI background check from outside the United States, rendering your fingerprints on paper, that could be a month before you get it. Okay, could be even longer. Versus USPS from within the United States, sometimes you get the FBI background check within the same day. Sometimes you get it within an hour. So that's a significantly longer period of time. What if you're in a time crunch? Okay, your program is sunsetting. Okay, the program is not going to exist over a certain period of time, or the professional cannot lodge the application over a certain period of time, right? Well, you might want to consider hopping on a flight and flying to the United States. Okay, depending on what's at stake, how important it is for you to get that FBI background check faster. Okay, you can get on a flight and fly to the United States. Okay, and pick a USPS office that's participating. Obviously, I would recommend that you check, that the USPS office that you're targeting does FBI background checks before you book the flight. Go there, and just as Patrick said, okay, go in person to the USPS office, render your fingerprints, get the FBI background check, and then do whatever. If you're applying on your own, okay, then do the next step with the background check, whether it be apostilling it or translating it or whatever, or give it to your professional if you have a lawyer that or somebody that's helping you, right? So that is in a jam. If it's high stakes, if you're really in a hurry to get the FBI background check and you have the money to book that flight, okay, or if you're just across the border in Mexico or Canada, okay, hop back over, okay, get the background check and from within the United States, and then proceed. Okay, so I would consider that kind of an emergency situation. Now, people who are listening carefully will notice that I said if you're a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident, you might not be able to get your fingerprints taken at a USPS location if you're not a legal permanent resident or a U.S. citizen. The reason I say might is because I haven't actually had somebody test this yet, okay? But some USPS offices will have a sign there that says basically that they want you to be a U.S. Citizen or a legal permanent resident in order for them to be able to service you for this process. Same with FBI approved channelers, okay? So I haven't tested this out to see really if that's enforced, okay? But the bottom line is your situation might be different if you're getting the FBI background check and you're not a U.S. green card holder or a U.S. citizen. Okay, so those are my thoughts. I guess my general thoughts about preparedness. Okay, if you're an American, freedom-seeking. Okay, first of all, even if you think you've had no brush with the law, if you're an American and you ever think you're going to apply for residency or citizenship, okay, get your FBI background check now. Get it right away. Go through the process, break that ice, go through it once, review the FBI background check. If you have no criminal record that shows up on the FBI background check, you're going to just get a short one-pager. It's going to say basically something to the effect that no results were returned, okay, related to your request. That's fine. If that's the message you get, great. Congratulations. You took a big step to prepare yourself, okay, to find out how to get the FBI background check, and you confirmed that there's no derogatory information on there, okay? However, if you apply for the FBI background check and you get a hit back that shows that there's a criminal record, okay, you're going to want to see, you might want to have, that FBI background check reviewed by someone like me or another lawyer that deals with these issues, okay, to make sure that the FBI background check accurately reflects what your record was, right? But the point is, as Patrick mentioned, fixing your FBI background check, first of all, investigating it and then making an application to challenge it and then fixing it, it can take a significant period of time, okay? Sometimes a person doesn't have the post-conviction relief. They have a conviction, they don't have an expungement, okay? But they're entitled to an expungement. They're eligible for an expungement or a record sealing or a vacatur, Okay. Well, in that case, the person has two different processes they have to go through. First, they have to go in and apply and petition the court for that type of post conviction relief. They got to go through that whole process. That alone can take months. Then they have to, if they're lucky, not lucky, but if they're fortunate, if everything goes according to plan, they get the benefit, they get the expungement. Then they got to start the second process, which is the challenging of the FBI background check. Okay. All this takes time, months actually. I mean, none of these processes happen in less than a month or two. In my experience, probably the fastest I've ever had an FBI background check challenge that we've been able to challenge and update it, blazing fast, is probably about a month and a half to 2 months. Okay, and I'd say the median time is much more in the several month period. So probably median is much more in the 3 to 5 month period. Okay, for one step processes. For people who need to go and first get the post conviction relief, you're talking about 6 months plus. Okay, for both processes, sometimes up to a year. Okay, so these are important things to keep in mind. Time is important. Time is of the essence.
Yeah, I'll add two little anecdotes here. The first one being, if you are ever in the emergency situation where you need to get your FBI background check fast, if you have to pick a place in the United States to fly into internationally, I would pick Dulles in Washington, D.C., because then as soon as you get your presumably clear FBI background check, you can then turn around to the State Department's Office of Authentications, which is the only place you can get it apostilled in person, um, at a relatively quick timeline. There are also companies that do it for you nowadays, um, but but the apostille on top of the FBI background checks adds a potential timeline delay to all of this. There is the FBI background check, but then authenticating it for use in a foreign country, if you're doing that by mail, typically takes 4 to 6 weeks. And so, if a lot of places require you to have your FBI background check within the last 6 months. And so, if you think about the issuance, getting your fingerprints, and then the issuance of that background check, and then getting an apostille, plus any form of international travel or international mail, best case scenario is that you're getting that thing in its final form at about week 6 to 8, when you have 12 weeks after that, 16 weeks after that, it's still valid in the eyes of most foreign governments. So um it's kind of like the relay race gun going off as soon as you get that thing issued, because getting it authenticated and running it to the end timeline is super important, especially if you're dealing with a consulate and a consular calendaring process. The fastest I've ever gotten a consular appointment generally is a month out, and that is, walking down my own street here and being fortunate. So there's all of these like intermittent deadlines that immediately start as soon as you start that process.
Absolutely. For about 4 years, Patrick, and everybody else who's listening, the US Office of Authentications only accepted apostille requests by mail. Okay, so there's only one way to request the apostille, and that was to mail it in. That ended. Okay, not ended. You could still request it by mail, but in person requests opened up in November of last year, November of 2024. That opened the way for courier companies to offer services whereby you could basically hire the local courier service to walk in your request. Okay, so that was a game changer. It is a game changer. I would just caution people that Patrick's proposed timeline, or the timeline for apostille mail-in requests, I'm not sure how long he said exactly. I think 4 to 6 weeks. This is variable. This is highly variable depending on the workload of the U.S. Office of Authentications. Back in, I forget which year it was, either fall of 2022 or fall of 2021. Me and other people that were helping people apply for citizenship by descent were in crisis because the apostille office was not doing any type of request that took less than 12 weeks. Okay, and for some applications that we were applying for, the FBI background check had to be less than 12 weeks old. So that obviously automatically foreclosed the possibility that a person could get the FBI background check in time, because If just the apostille request alone takes over 12 weeks, well, then that's not even taking into account getting the FBI background check, preparing the application for the apostille, sending it for apostille, getting it back from the U.S. Office of Authentications, and then getting it translated. None of that. So I now have kind of defaulted. If you're applying for a process that requires an FBI background check that's less than 3 months, okay, I've defaulted to using a courier and to walk in the apostille request. So I hire a courier for my cases. And I recommend everybody else do the same. If, like Patrick said, you're dealing with a process that allows the FBI background check to be up to 6 months old, okay, fine. Then I think you can dispense with using a courier, but you still got to act quickly. You can't sit on the FBI background check once you get it. You got to send it right away for apostille and line that up with your application, process. So that's that. One other point I want to make, and then we're coming up on an hour. I'll open up for any final questions or comments. But I'm a citizenship and immigration lawyer. I also do post-conviction relief. Okay, so I also help people, quote unquote, clean up their records. So juvenile record sealings, vacators, expungements, that type of thing. And one thing that I've learned from experience over the years is at least a third, maybe a half of people who have a criminal conviction that did not lead to jail time. Okay. So a person who was convicted of a crime but did not spend time in jail, they had a sentencing that was anything other than jail time. So a combination of probation or some sort of fines, okay, or mandatory community service or mandatory, health class, okay. At least a third and maybe a half of these people, in my experience, don't understand the fact that they were convicted of a crime. At least a third of these people think that they were arrested and charged, but then I did boom, 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 whatever, and the charge went away. They think they don't have a conviction. Okay. They're confused about the state of their criminal record. And I believe it's because of an association, an inextricable association between serving jail time and having a conviction. I think a lot of people kind of just don't really fathom the fact that you could be convicted of a crime and not actually have gone to jail. Okay. Why does this matter? This matters because so many of these people, Americans, many of them, are going through life expecting no criminal conviction to show up on their FBI background check. They think they just had a charge and an arrest and a charge, and they did something, and then the charge was dropped. Wrong. Okay. A lot of those people, maybe even a majority, definitely at least a third in my experience, but a lot of those people are confused. Okay, they have a conviction without knowing that they have a conviction. So for people listening to this, if you're an American, if you've been fingerprinted by a law enforcement agency, there's a good chance you actually have a conviction on your record, even if you don't know it or not. You got to get your FBI background check and see what it says. Okay, were you just arrested? Were you arrested and charged? Were you arrested, charged, and convicted? So the threshold decision should be, if I, as a freedom-loving American, okay, who wants to at any point in the future apply for another residency or second citizenship or third citizenship, have ever been fingerprinted by law enforcement, I need to get my FBI background check and understand what actually is the state of my quote unquote criminal record. That's the threshold, in my opinion. Okay. It's 12:01 Pacific Standard Time where I'm here right now. We've been going for about 57, 58 minutes. Want to ask if anybody has any questions or last comments before we start bringing this home and talking about a space topic for Thursday.
I'll jump in. I've been to a designated channeler for taking fingerprints and ordering an FBI background check. And usually it's come back within a day, often within an hour of the time that my fingerprints were digitally submitted. And so I have the impression that channelers may have more availability than a post office in many cases. Has that been your experience as well, or not? It sounds like you have a preference for post offices.
Yeah, so that's right. Sometimes the channelers can return really fast results as well. I don't think they have more access. Okay, when you say more access, maybe there are more channelers throughout the United States. That's certainly possible because I think there are about, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's 180 US qualifying USPS offices who can take fingerprints. I'm not sure if the number of channelers is more than that. It might be. But in terms of preference and speed and accessibility, no, I don't think the channelers have more than the USPS. They're still private organizations. They're still private companies that are contracted by the federal government. Where, of course, the USPS office is obviously a government agency. But great point. I'm glad you brought that up. The channelers can be fast too. That's absolutely right. Sometimes they can return really fast results as well.
Okay. And then I'm also wondering about um, for people who have former citizenships who are naturalizing or applying for a residency elsewhere, are background checks from those former countries of citizenship often required or usually required?
Yeah, oftentimes they are. So a, a common criteria that I see is background check from any country that you're a citizen of or have been resident in. Um, Different countries pick different time periods. Sometimes it's country you've been resident in for at least 6 months or at least 3 months or at least a year. Okay, so those thresholds are varying. But yeah, if you're talking about somebody who was citizen of a country and lived in that country, yeah, that is background checks are also commonly requested. Obviously it's country by country, but yeah, that's a common request.
Okay. And then my last question is, as one's collection of citizenships grows, each additional citizenship likely requires an increasing number of document requests from the growing number of countries. And I'm wondering if you've ever strategized with somebody, the past client perhaps, to prioritize citizenships that require background checks and postpone those that do not, in order to minimize the necessity for making those document requests.
Great point, and you're absolutely right. The more citizenships and even residencies that you pick up, right? The more kind of drag you're going to pick up. I think of it kind of like barnacles accruing under a boat, right? Because you gotta obviously provide more documentation from previous countries. That's definitely an issue. That is real. That's a concern. Um, as far as your question is concerned, no, I personally have never had it be that concern is so great that I've recommended a client to hold off on getting a particular citizenship. Obviously, we're talking about competing interests and issues here, right? You kind of have to weigh like what's kind of more important. Generally, my default position that all other things being equal, you should pursue a citizenship ASAP. That kind of, at least in my experience, that's kind of outweighed the concern about holding off on getting a citizenship because of background check concerns. I don't say that will always be the case. I'm sure there's some profile out there of a person for whom, the document request would be so onerous, and and the marginal benefit of picking up a particular citizenship so small that it might make sense for them to delay. But generally, no, we don't want to delay. We want to race ASAP to get a citizenship that qualify for, unless there's a explicit countervailing consideration.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Great questions, Patrick. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm going to add in Giorno's tactic for FBI background checks while being a citizen abroad or who is indefinitely living abroad, because I thought it was really creative and it's something I'm attempting to emulate for others right now. And that is get your 1164 ink fingerprinted so that if you're ever abroad, you already have those things inked. And then when you're in the United States, you basically have that completed, pre put it in an envelope as though you're going to send it in, and then put that within another envelope and send it to your own digital mailbox. That way, when you're abroad and you need an FBI background check, you can submit the application online, and then you go to your digital mailbox provider and you say, "Hey, I have this specific envelope in my digital mailbox. Open it, and there's an envelope inside. Just drop that in the mail, and it's already pre-stamped and everything." That way, you can turn around an FBI background check relatively quickly and you don't have to mess around with getting your fingerprints inked or dealing with international mail services in the process. Getting it apostilled will then require another level of effort, which I won't cover here, but at least for getting a FBI background check from while being a citizen abroad, that was Journo's strategy for doing it.
Excellent. Thanks for expounding on that. And you know what, Patrick, you just made me think of something, and I don't know the answer to this. I wonder how long an FBI background check application that's held in abeyance will last for. And what I mean basically is executing your plan, applying online for the FBI background check, getting the confirmation, and then just holding on to that confirmation, in the envelope with the fingerprints. Can you hold on to that for 6 months and then send it in, or a year? I actually don't know the answer to that. And as I'm speaking out loud, I think it's clear that I'm going to have to make that an experiment, and see how long that could be good for. If that's good for a year, 2 years, well, heck, might as well just do that. Throw that in there. Throw that FBI background check application confirmation in with the proof of. The confirmation has the proof of payment, but throw that in there with the fingerprint card and have that at your virtual mailbox.
Yeah, that could absolutely work. And to piggyback on David's previous point, if you are in the US and you have a citizenship of a foreign country and you're applying to country C and you need a record for both, you face the same issues of getting a background check from a foreign country while being in the United States. The same issues apply to fingerprinting. I see this come up quite frequently with people who are American Canadian dual citizens because there's no place to get your fingerprints taken in the United States for Canada's database of criminal records. So you face the same issues, right? You have to get your fingerprints inked here and send it abroad. So all of these tactics we talk about here, even though we're focused on Americans and the FBI background check, they can be applied to other countries that require fingerprinting.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well said. Well said. Yeah, there's no doubt. And David, I don't think you were here for the previous space. Patience was here, and we were talking in depth about this dynamic that the more citizenships you pick up, and residencies in some cases, the more documentation you're accruing that you're going to have to submit, okay, for a future application for citizenship and residency. That's no doubt a dynamic. And yeah, I mean that's a consideration. Alex isn't here, but I'm sure if Alex was here, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but if Alex was here, he may say, that's a reason to consider not going overboard on citizenships. Maybe not past 4 or 5 or whatever it is, right? So, just some considerations to keep in mind. But keeping it simple, right? If you're an American, either dual citizen or an American single citizen, if you're ever going to apply for citizenship or residency in the future, in my opinion, you should get your FBI background check right away, okay, to go through the process one time and check to see what's on the report. Okay, great. So this has been a great space. We've been going for an hour and 10 minutes. Everybody knows what's happening next. Okay, I'm going to solicit any topic suggestions for the next space. If anybody has any suggestion or suggestions, come forth and speak. Otherwise, we will just let the interwebs decide by voting on a poll that I put up. So next mobility space is going to be Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard. Anybody have a topic that they want to talk about? Okay, that's fine. Sounds like nobody has something particular. I'm thinking about possibly visiting the passport validity period discussion, 10 years versus 5 years versus 2 years. Are there any 2 years out there? Old passports used to have 2-year validity periods. But that's something that I think is an interesting discussion, something to think about. So I'll put that up as one of the potential topics, along with a couple others that I will think about. So stay tuned. Check back on my feed later today. There's going to be a poll. Make sure to vote on the poll for the next topic discussion. And I want to thank everybody who showed up and participated. Patrick And David and all of our anonymous listeners, have a great and super productive week. And always remember, freedom of movement is the answer. Freedom of movement through multiple citizenship. Have a good one.